Once, about every 30 years roughly, give or take 2 years, a game is released that is so good it will make you blow your own balls off. And if you don't have balls, you will wish you did. The last time this happened was 1992, the same year the Blue Jays had just won the World Series 2 years in a row. The world was celebrating, and then out of nowhere, The Legend of Zelda is released in North America for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, the rumblings can be heard again. Something is afoul in the air. The clouds paint pictures of the future. The year is 2018. And something big has happened on Kickstarter. Something so big that it makes you want to dust off that old pistol that you used to blow your balls off many years ago. And you wish you still had balls to blow off. But you don't. And since you don't have any balls, the only thing you can do is be perplexed in wonder. That is Hazelnut Bastille or Bastille, I don't know how they pronounce it. Hazelnut Bastille is a top-down Zelda-like action RPG presented in a rigorously period 16-bit style. That's right, guys. Hazelnut is competing with Zelda. They want to take over Zelda. They want to take over Final Fantasy. They are the new Secret of Mana. See this here, guys? This was a classic. To this day, it's the best Zelda game ever made. You know what else was a good classic? Right here, boys. Secret of Mana. What would happen if these two games merged and had a baby? Hazelnut Bastille is what would happen. They were looking to raise $65,000 US. They've already surpassed that goal. They are now at 120,000 Canadian. There is currently 17 days left to go. 2,472 backers. And in case you know anything about Kickstarter, the majority of the backers will always come in the last few days, in some cases the last few hours of the Kickstarter campaign. And this company is creating what will become one of the great legends. This will be on the shelves right up there. Physical copy. Mind you, this is not just a Steam game. This is coming out for the PS4 and the Switch, pending that they make their stretch goals, which they will. There is a demo that has 2 to 3 hours of content. I'm still working my way through the demo. I've only touched on it so far, and what I like, what I see, I like. The demo does include 2 to 3 hours content, some overworld preview content, and an entire dungeon level to play through, complete with quest items, puzzles, and bosses. Best of all, this content is completely outside of the game itself, so it features a standalone level you will not find in the full game. So the demo is not actually like the first 2-3 hours of the real game. It is meant to be just that. It's a demo. So far, they have met their stretch goals. $65,000 was funded. $75,000 they added more levels and puzzles. $85,000 was just met recently. So 120,000 Canadian is about 85,000 US. It just adds translations. Nobody cares about that. Nintendo Switch is coming next. 110,000. So if you want a Switch copy, go and back these guys. More music will come at 135,000. We'll get into that later. So the last stretch goal that they have announced is minigames and an arena rush game. We don't really know what that is. They will announce more, no doubt, because they have 11 stretch goals. And I know for a fact that they're going to raise every single penny. However, the catch is the game doesn't actually release until 2020. Estimated release date 2020, which is about 28 years from the time Zelda Link's Awakening was released. All right, so let's get into what Hazelnut is before we get into the finer details. Hazelnut. Now here's the kicker, the art presentation. They stuck with what was great, and they explained some of the science behind it. The Hazelnut is a result of combining the charming 16 by 16 grid style of the early 90s with modern color selection sensibilities. Part of the clarity of games from this era back in the 90s was the extra emphasis on clearly defined edges and regular collision bounds, which, while perhaps being necessitated by degradation of the picture on CRT televisions, which that is true, also creates a super readable experience of gameplay, which we still heavily appreciate to this day, even with the constraints of that period now lifted. So they are going to purposely constrain themselves. They're going to take the best of what we have today and throw it into a 90s era game, as if this game could have come out back in the 90s. So in the great standout examples, a scene reads as a collection of symbols by which the player can immediately appraise their situation, and the most important information is in the visual foreground. The graphics and color palette are just absolutely beautiful. They do go on about the color palette. Here it is. Another trait of the 16-bit era that we really admire is the economy of color selection. Most surfaces have between 3 to 8 color values. This was partially a result of needing to meet the requirement of no more than 4 palettes of 16 colors each per scene, and that was due to limitation on the Super Nintendo hardware. Okay, so they did it like that back in the day because they had to. But because they did it like that, the crisp contrasts this limited and unified palette of this unified and limited palette helps to create is incredibly striking and something we are emulating in all of our game art. So the limitations of that hardware and the color limitations actually is what made the artwork so beautiful. It's what made the art what it is. And so they're purposely going to kind of be mimicking that. So now that I'm not going to go through everything. You can check it all out on the Kickstarter, but they do have one final ace in the hole, which is the secret of a rocking soundtrack. You cannot have an RPG without a good soundtrack. There's no such thing. It doesn't matter how good your gameplay is, doesn't matter how good your plot is. You have to have a good soundtrack to back it up. It doesn't have to be Final Fantasy VI good, Final Fantasy VII good, but it has to be pretty dang good. It has to at least be good. So they've hired themselves, number one, a smoking hot composer here. And number two, they're sticking with the classics. So it goes on to say, one of the most striking things everyone remembers about the 16-bit era was the extremely memorable sound front-based music. The 8-bit era was known for its powerful melody-driven 4-track audio, featuring natively synthesized wave instruments. However, Sony's Super Nintendo chip sound card for the Super Nintendo upped the number of sound channels to 8, so it doubled, and introduced music built out of small instrument sample libraries. The result was that the tracks of this time have this wonderful trait of occupying a strangely satisfying middle ground between synthetic and acoustic music, which complements the era of its time and created some of the most memorable music of all time. In fact, the guy who composed Final Fantasy VI music also helped compose Final Fantasy VII music, etc. But all of the Final Fantasy music that he composed, and he did a lot of music for Final Fantasies, the entire series, a lot of the hardcore fans agree with myself that his best music was on the Super Nintendo with Final Fantasy VI. And it was just something about the hardware. It was just something about that style of music that console was able to produce. It's just absolutely, it's on another plane, man. It's like majestic music. Really hard to explain. If you haven't played it or listened to that kind of music, you got to do it check it out for yourself. You have to experience it for yourself. So apparently the lady that they've hired, yes, she's attractive, but she also has a lot of experience. And she's even written, she knows, she's well composed, well familiar with the 16-bit style of music. And she has experience creating said music. However, the kicker is that they actually hired a celebrity, what they're calling a celebrity composer, and it's the guy Hiroki Kikuta. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he's the celebrity guest composer, and he's the guy that did a lot of work for the Secret of Mana soundtrack, and he's most famous for the opening Secret of Mana theme song. Let's check it out. I'll show you. This is his most famous work. Almost everybody knows this theme. Almost everybody. If you've played RPGs, you know the theme. I mean, the guy's a legend. And the best part, perhaps for some, is that they're only going to be spending a fraction of the money, a very tiny amount of money, from the Kickstarter campaign on jet skis. So as you can see, most of the money will go toward development, music budget, payment fees, taxes, licenses. Jet skis is only a tiny bit, and then the rest is rewards and business. I don't really know what that means. Oh, rewards, okay, they're the t-shirts and whatnot that you can get or whatever. Yeah, so that's it. I don't know, man. I'm super hyped. I believe that this is going to lead... people are going to start waking up. As I believe Square Enix is already waking up. This can be a AAA title. This, with a handful of staff members, what do they got? 5-6 guys working on this? Let's pull it up. There is the list of staff members up here somewhere. Meet the creators. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 members, and that includes 2 composers. You can make a AAA game without a $100 million budget. Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, that was a AAA game. This is a AAA game. You don't need to spend hundreds of millions of dollars and then potentially lose money like Square Enix just did. $33 million loss. Canceled 3 out of 4 download DLCs for Final Fantasy 15. I want Square Enix to wake up, start making more games like Octopath Traveler. They're easier to make. They can still have great gameplay, great music. You don't need to go overboard on the graphics. You can make 16-bit style games. And indie games are blowing up. This is an indie game. Just know, I think that companies are starting to wake up, and they're starting to realize they don't need to spend $100 million to make a buck. And they don't need to spend 10 years making a game to make that money. So this comes out in 2020. Check it out. That's the final release date. Highly recommend everybody backs Kickstarter. But leave a comment below. Tell me if I'm crazy, man. Like, am I super hyped because I'm addicted to retro games, or are you guys hyped too? Like, what's going on here? Does anybody else see this as the future of the smaller teams, lower budgets, creating high quality games?